My name is Sam Pessin. I'm one of the founders of Remote Year. It's a year-long work and travel program for people who have remote jobs. Since most people in the audience are intimately familiar with Remote Year, I wanted to spend this time talking a little bit more broadly about the trends and the drivers that sort of make this sort of lifestyle make sense, both for us and for our employers kind of on the other side as well. And it all starts with our parents and our grandparents. They really defined the 9 to 5. Right? It made so much sense for the work they were doing at the time. Just to take a really simple example, an assembly line at a factory, right? If you're making a car, literally they needed 100 people in one room to make that car, right? It's the opposite of what we have now. And because of that, this sort of 9 to 5 lifestyle with weekends and vacations and retirement eventually made a lot of sense. And what it enabled them to do is really separate work from life. And so traditionally in that model, they were really able to kind of bifurcate those two things and have kind of satisfaction on both sides. They had their job, and then in the evenings on the weekends, they had family, they had friends, and they had travel. Lots of things have changed since then. The first big one was the invention of the personal computer, right? Although all of us are pretty much going blind now from staring at these machines all day, what they actually enabled us to do was be productive independently. So we no longer needed this massive group and this assembly line to actually get work done with the help of a few simple applications and a personal computer. And the second thing that happened was connectivity. And it's not just about the internet, it's really in the last 10 or 15 years that these really, really impactful communications tools have been developed. Things like Skype video conferencing and things like Google Drive and Microsoft SharePoint to actually allow you to collaborate not only as effectively as 100 people in that factory, but even more effectively. It's given us a lot of freedom, it's given us a lot of autonomy, but it also has some downside. We haven't really figured out how to balance that new kind of work life effectively yet, because we're still living in this old model with 9 to 5 and weekends. Raise your hand if you work more hours now per week than you did when you started your career. And raise your hand if you have worked through a vacation in the last 3 years. Yeah. I was in Switzerland a couple of years ago with some of my best friends when I was working at Bain in consulting, and we were in this beautiful ski chalet. I had 1 week off the entire year, and 4 or 5 of us were literally spending 2 or 3 hours every day cranking out slides, sending emails in the sauna of this house, which was like the only room that had Wi-Fi. And it just goes to show that the work we were doing didn't really match the model we were living in. So I think that really is kind of inspiration for all of us to rethink and not necessarily push back and say, I need more vacation days, I need more weekends, and I want to retire early, but actually to kind of embrace that shift and think about your life and your work-life balance a little bit differently. The other really important thing that's been going on, which is a trend that's so overplayed, but it's also true, is that millennials really value experiences over things. And just some data around that, in the last 30 years, all consumer spend globally has increased 70% on kind of real-time live events, which includes travel mostly, compared to all other categories. So if you actually think about that in terms of growth, it's about double GDP across all categories, spent almost exclusively in sort of travel and music festivals and stuff like that, which probably makes sense based on your own personal spending patterns. So when you tie those two things together, you sort of get this new lifestyle, this new model that actually makes a lot of sense for us, which is travel and work and kind of create those things at the same time, rather than be tied by your kind of traditional 9 to 5 model. On the employer side, there's actually kind of 3 key things that make this sort of lifestyle actually make sense for them as well. The first is recruitment, the second is retention, and the third is what I'll call growth. On the recruitment side, have you guys seen Office Space? Does anybody want to work in that kind of environment anymore? Absolutely not, right? People do not tolerate that at all. And it's actually led to a lot of traditional companies really getting pretty crushed by Facebook and Google and these tech companies that have come in and stolen a lot of their talent. They're literally initiatives almost across any traditional company you could imagine around how to compete with companies like Facebook and Google on the recruitment side. But it's not just because Facebook and Google are recognized brands that everybody wants to work for. It's because they've actually found a way to match the lifestyle that we want and that we need to be productive. For example, everybody knows what Google Campus is. They literally call it campus, and they have beds there. They've explicitly called out the fact that work and life are kind of coming together into this symbiotic relationship. But there's another approach to that, which is just simply to let your employees work remotely. It's cheaper, it's easier, and you don't need to invest in something like a Google Campus to make that happen. The second part about retention is also really interesting. I'm sure a lot of the companies you guys work for or have worked for would sponsor grad school for you. So, if you commit to 2 or 3 or 4 more years on the back end, they would actually pay for you to go get a grad degree. It's something that's happening more and more, but again, just unlocking the potential for your employees to work remotely can kind of have the same impact. The CEO of Kaplan Education, if you guys are familiar with that company, he's one of the thought leaders in remote work, says that literally from the moment that they unlocked that lifestyle model for their team, they've had better retention of their top talent pretty much every year. It's a really interesting data point. The third part about growth, which I think is kind of the most important thing, is it really comes down to why you would even go get that grad school degree in the first place that your company may have offered you. While classes are obviously a core piece of that, if you ask people why they went back to get their MBA, for example, it's not for the classes, right? It's for the network, and it's for the growth they go through during that experience. And I guess I'll just pose a question for the group, which is, do you think you get more growth and a better network by sitting in Cambridge at Harvard Business School, or by sitting in this room surrounded by these people right now while you travel the world and are surrounded by this amount of talent? So, what's to come from here? I think there's going to be a lot more innovation around these sort of lifestyle models. Still, we're kind of at the beginning of this shift towards bringing work and bringing life together and really understanding what that means for all of us. We've all chosen this lifestyle of traveling and working, but there's a lot of different ways to think about that too. And I'm just really excited to see what comes out of that, and applaud everybody who's sort of made it happen so far in your lives. So Remote Year, again, is a platform that can enable that for a lot of people, but we're just a small part of this much larger shift around work and life and what that means for all of us. Thanks, guys.